A or B?
You've got no money, no experience. You're going to fail.
Left or right?
Seeing what everyone else sees, but thinking what no one else has thought.
Yes or no?
I would very often be ready to act before government had even seen the problem.
Welcome to The Art of Deciding with Bruce Whitfield.
Hello. The internet tells us we make around 35,000 decisions every day. Thank you for making one of yours listening to The Art of Deciding. I'm Bruce Whitfield. I'm a financial journalist and speaker, and I talk to decision makers for a living. In this podcast, we get people who spend their lives making big decisions to give us some insight as to how they do it. Maybe it'll help your 35,000 choices feel just a little bit easier, or at least maybe help you become even more successful. Do you like a curry? If you do, what goes well with your favourite vindaloo or jalfrezi? I reckon a lot of us would say a long, cold beer. And if we were pushed to be more specific, we'd probably make it a Cobra Beer.
My idea for Cobra Beer evolved while I was a student at Cambridge through a dissatisfaction of fizzy lagers and a love of English ale and a love of food, and in particular Indian food.
Karen Bilimoria had studied accountancy in India, and through what he describes as one of those sliding door moments, and we'll find out more about those, he then found himself studying law at Cambridge. And alongside learning about the judicial system, he also discovered that British beer left a lot to be desired. So he decided to do something about it.
My idea was to create a beer that would have the refreshment of a lager and the smoothness of an ale combined that would go very well with all food, and in particular Indian food. That was my idea. I mean, many people have ideas. It's putting them into action. And after I left Cambridge, I made the decision that I actually want to start up in business.
Which is quite a decision when you've already done one degree, you're doing another one, and you're playing polo for the university in your spare time. But before we even get to that decision, Karen Bilimoria had already decided to break the family mold. Born in 1961 in Hyderabad in India, his was a family that had a very particular focus when it came to choosing an occupation.
If you look at my family tree on my father's side, it is generals, former chief of the Indian Navy, Air Force officers, and. So there's a military influence throughout. And I, to this day, feel completely at home in a services environment.
The military discipline, you learned to box at the age of 8, I think, with the Gurkhas.
Yes.
That stands you in some good stead, I guess. And you spend time, your dad is based in the UK for a while. Just all of that's upbringing. Has it been valuable?
There's no running away from it. It influenced me. I did an unarmed combat course with the Indian para-commandos, which would be the equivalent of the SAS over here, at the age of 14 on a holiday in the desert when my father was commanding a desert brigade. And, that would mean getting up literally at the crack of dawn and going through rigorous training. And I still remember some of the moves even now. I learned how to ride at a very young age, and you get up very early in the morning to go out riding. And when I learned how to play polo in India, I would be riding very early in the morning and then riding again in the afternoons. So you had to put in the work. There was no shortcuts to doing all those things. And also I learned from my father where he could get by with very little sleep. He would take us out on exercise when they were in maneuvers in the desert when we were young boys. And we'd go and sleep out in tents, go on the tanks, see how they didn't sleep through the night or catch 40 winks whenever they could. We experienced all that at a very young age. I first experienced live shelling at the age of 8. I was very lucky.
Yes, clearly they missed. So yes, you were lucky, no doubt. Talk to me then about that decision at the age of 16 to go into business. You study business, you study accounting in India. What was that decision, and did your father approve of it, I wonder?
My father really never pushed me to join the army. It was a great influence. I was brought up in the armed forces, but I was worried that if I went into the service, I'd always be following in my father's footsteps. Even then, I knew that he was going to get to the top, and he did. He was, he was commander-in-chief of the Central Army with 350,000 troops under his command. And I just saw one or two instances where if you had a run-in with a senior officer, somebody didn't like you, you had a black mark against your career, that was the end of your career. I said, that's very risky. And in my case, I'd always be compared with my father or my uncles or my grandfather. So I said, I need to do my own thing.
So, back to deciding that it's not the army, it's not accountancy, it's not even the law, it's beer that's the way forward. How does a student from India, living in Cambridge, know where to begin his brewing journey? Well, first of all, there was a decision not to do this alone.
I teamed up with my childhood friend, Arjun Reddy. Our families have known each other for 4 generations in India. And so we set up in business together. And there was complete trust between the two of us. And we were very different. He had different skills. I had different skills, which is actually ideal. As a partnership, you should be bringing different skills to the table. But the most important thing was I trusted him completely. And we actually moved in and lived and worked from the same flats. And where we started Cobra was a roof conversion on the Fulham Palace Road, overlooking Bishop's Park, a second and third floor, where the top floor was the sitting and dining room, which was our office floor, and then 2 bedrooms on the floor below. And then the staircases would have piles of Cobra Beer. Of course, the relationships meant not only trusting Arjun, but through him, his uncle, Keshav Reddy, was our mentor. He introduced us to successful entrepreneurs for us to be inspired by. Through him that we got the introduction to Mysore Breweries, the biggest independent brewers in India. And of course, they gave us a chance. The first thing was they didn't make a beer of the type that I wanted, this less gassy, extra smooth beer sitting in between a lager and an ale that would go well with all food. And secondly, they didn't have a brand name that was appropriate. The 2 brand names they had, one was a name for dog food, Pals in the UK, and the other one called Knockout was an 8% strength beer, which we didn't want, and a name that would never have been allowed in the UK. So they said, well, look, you're going to fail. You've got no money, no experience. All our competitors except Kingfisher have failed. Why don't you choose your own brand name? Your brand name will fail. We'll have the prestige of exporting beer from India to the UK. And by the way, if you want to make this beer, we don't make a beer like this. You come here and sit with our brewmaster and create the beer, and we'll open our brewery to you. And that's what I did. I went with sample beer bottles. In those days, you could carry liquid in your hand luggage. And I sat down in the laboratory with their brewer, who happened to be the best brewmaster in India, who'd spent 6 years in the Czech Republic, had a PhD from brewing, and knew everything about brewing, was a brilliant brewer. And I sat in the laboratory, tasted all these beers with him, trying to describe this taste that I had in my mind and convey what this beer would be like. And he said, okay, if we want to create that, it's going to be an intricate recipe. We're going to need not just your malted barley, yeast, water, and hops, but we're going to need 3 varieties of hops and wheat and rice and maize, and a very complicated recipe to get this delicate beer that you're looking for. And that's how we started working on Cobra Beer and created it from scratch.
Cobra Beer is one of the most awarded beers in the world, possibly the most. Karen Bilimoria took that original idea and built a business, but an exceptionally successful business. Also, a life of entrepreneurship, leadership, and philanthropy. He's served on many, many committees and earned many titles, including being awarded a CBE for services to business and entrepreneurship, and becoming Lord Bilimoria, an independent crossbench life peer. He's Baron Bilimoria of Chelsea. That's a huge number of achievements, presumably the result of a similarly huge number of decisions. Yet in 2023, he gave a TED Talk entitled Luck, Serendipity, and Sliding Doors, a talk as he describes it about those situations in your life where if you hadn't been somewhere or hadn't done something, your whole life would be different. He refers to it a lot from his own experience. His parents met at a dance his father shouldn't have been at. He met his wife at a party he wasn't going to go to. And yes, he came from a background full of people with connections and agency. But is this all really just about luck?
Well, the best definition of luck is when determination meets opportunity. If you're not determined, you won't even see the opportunity. And I visualize it like waves that go past you in life. So if you're determined, you might just catch one of those waves. If you're not determined, those waves will go past you all your life. And that's what it's about. Determination meets opportunity. It's like sport. When I played polo is one of those sports that's at very high speed. It's a very dangerous game, but it's all about anticipating. As soon as the game turns, you're charging in one direction, and then you've got to turn around and go in the other direction. Now, if you can spot that the game is going to turn around that fraction of a second before everyone else, then you'll be on the ball before them. but it's anticipating being there. And it's like the greatest footballers, the strikers, they're in the right place at the right time because they're anticipating being where the ball's going to be, not where the ball is. And that all boils down to determination and always seeking out that opportunity. And it's like serendipity, the best definition of serendipity. I chaired the Cambridge Judge Business School Advisory Board for 5 years, and one of our professors there, Mark Durand, describes serendipity as seeing what everyone else sees, but thinking what no one else has thought.
Seeing what everyone else sees, but thinking what no one else has thought, because we're all subjected to the same influences, the same information flows all the time. Yet somehow some people seem to be in the right place at the right time. And it is that combination of factors, of course. But what drives your decision-making process? The great father of behavioral economics, Daniel Kahneman, talks about informing your gut and then trusting it. You've educated yourself very, very actively. 3 postgraduate qualifications at business schools, for example. You take this stuff incredibly seriously. Describe your decision-making process to me.
You're constantly making decisions. And I've seen this with so many people. And again, this is my father's influence. My father would always have a clean desk. He would sometimes walk me down a corridor and say, look, do you see that, officer? Do you see that pile of paper on his desk? That's not the way to be. But his desk would always be clean, only the file he was working on. And so there was nothing pending, so to say. Everything was dealt with straight away, not put off. So you have got to have the guts to be able to make those decisions and make them quickly. What I like is to have as much information as possible before I make a decision. And that means keeping an open mind. And it's the Dalai Lama, I remember once I had the privilege of meeting him, and one of the talks that he gave, he said, when you're confronted with a challenge in life, always think widely. I've learned, even studying law, one of the things I remember of studying law is a law exam. The question will be A, B, C. A does this, B does this, C does this, advise A, advise B, advise C. Now, to give that advice, you've got to think widely, look at former cases, look at judgments from judges, look at acts of parliament, look at texts, look at legal journals, and then apply all that wide knowledge and focus it down to a very specific advice and a point of time. So that ability to think widely and then focus down and make that decision, I think, is very important. And keeping an open mind, being willing to listen to people, and then not procrastinating, not putting things off. And that's the entrepreneurial mindset, again, is also very important. A big company mindset, or I would say bureaucratic mindset, is playing not to lose. So if you are presented with an opportunity, the first reaction is, maybe I shouldn't do this. Why should I not do this? Let's think about this tomorrow. Let's put it in next year's plans. Whereas the entrepreneur's attitude is playing to win. How can I do this? How quickly can I do this? It's a positive attitude, proactive attitude. And it boils down to the entrepreneurship is about spotting a problem, solution, action. And I remember when I was president of the Confederation of British Industry, going through the biggest global crisis since the Second World War with the pandemic and then the start of the Ukraine war. I'm boasting, but I'm proud of it. I was a very effective president because of my entrepreneurial background and attitude. I would very often be ready to act before government had even seen the problem. You're that far ahead of the game in seeing the problem, having the solution, being ready to act. The furlough scheme was conceived in collaboration with the Confederation British Industry. The bounce back loans, government wouldn't listen to 100% guaranteed loans. And without the 100% guaranteed loans, the money wouldn't have flowed through and thousands of SMEs would not have been able to survive. And that was something, was an idea that I put forward that the government eventually listened to. And lateral flow testing, I was the first person to suggest lateral flow testing when the government wouldn't listen. And I persisted, which is another quality of entrepreneurs, they never give up. And eventually government listened. If we brought in those lateral flow tests earlier, that would have saved lockdowns 2 and 3. Just imagine if we'd managed to work through children going to school, universities, if government had listened earlier.
Don't procrastinate. Keep an open mind. Think widely. Don't play not to lose, play to win. And predict where the game is going to go. As Karen Bilimoria says, it was his entrepreneurial mindset that drove some of the most important decisions made to try and help the United Kingdom through COVID and lockdown. It meant he could see solutions before those in government who perhaps had a different way of thinking. In the mid-90s, when he was just in his 30s, he was asked to run as a Conservative MP. Instead, he chose to focus on his new beer business. But then, in 2006, politics called again, this time the chance to become one of the youngest peers in the House of Lords. For the forward-thinking, decision-addicted entrepreneur, isn't government and bureaucracy just a world of procrastinatory hell?
I get very frustrated when I can see the answer so clearly and others don't see it, and eventually they do. And that time lag does frustrate me a lot. And of course, you've got to be able to work through that, because if you're confrontational, then you're not going to be able to get people to believe in you and to act on what you're suggesting. So you've got to get people to work with you, and that sometimes takes a bit of time. I just wish it would happen quicker.
How do you manage that decision-making process? Because doing it for yourself in your own business, you're able to make calls and you live and die by them. When it comes to politics, however, it's influence to get an appropriate decision. How do you manage that?
It varies from every situation. And of course, it depends on going to the right person as well. And the more experienced I've become, the easier it is for me to realize this is who I need to go to, who can make this decision or who will listen to me and who has the ability to help make it happen. And time after time, that is the way I've been able to help a lot of people. There are many people who come to me for help. And if I'm able to go to the right person and say, can you sort the situation out? They will only do it if I have the credibility for them to even talk to me and have the trust that they know that I'm asking them to do something that is the right thing to do and is for the benefit of whoever I'm trying to help, but will also be of benefit to the person who's helping. And one of my Harvard Business School, because later on I went on to carry on my education through executive education at 3 business schools. And one of my Harvard Business School professors, Frances Fry, gave a lecture on trust during the pandemic, a virtual lecture, and I'll never forget it. She said trust is like a triangle. To get trust from people, you've got to be authentic, is one tip of the triangle. The other tip of the triangle is the logic. You've got to have the capability to deliver what you're promising to deliver, the knowledge, the professional know-how. And thirdly, the third point of the triangle is empathy. Are you in it for yourself or are you in it for them? So if you are authentic, if you have the logic, and if you are empathetic, you can get trust from other people. It's that trust that you've got to create and the credibility that you've got to have to be in a position to make things happen. And in the early days of starting in business, if I give you an extreme example, I call it crossing the credibility gap. When you start in business, you have no credibility. Nobody knows you. Nobody knows your brand. Nobody knows your product. How do you convince people to buy from you, supply you, finance you, work for you when you have zero credibility? And in those days, they would do it if you had complete faith and passion and confidence and belief in your product. That would give people the faith and the confidence to trust you to give you a chance. To the extent that in the early days, I priced Cobra more expensively than all my competitors for an unknown brand and a minimum 5 case drop. And when people didn't need my product, people would show me the door saying, why do I need you? I've got Carlsberg, I've got Kingfisher. I don't need another product, let alone an unknown product. To price it higher and have a minimum case drop. And that has paid off all these years later, that I've been always very careful about protecting my gross margins.
But it's a critical decision, isn't it? And a gutsy decision as a young entrepreneur starting out to be making that call to say, I have faith that this product will work. Where does that confidence come from?
The Duke of Wellington's motto is fortune favors the brave. And you've got to have that confidence, that belief in yourself. And I don't know, maybe my influences of my father, for example, of the tough situations he's been through, been at war, and to have learnt about leadership firsthand from him was a great privilege. The advice that he's given me, that good leadership is not in the good times, it's in times of adversity. It's having that can-do attitude and always being willing to go the extra mile. I mean, that's the best advice my father ever gave me when I started working the first time. He said, whenever you're asked to do something, don't just do it. Do that little bit extra that you were not asked to do. And that attitude of always going that extra mile and taking the initiative and being innovative.
You stretch yourself very, very far. You've been Chancellor of Birmingham University, the head of the CBI. You created the UK-India Business Council. You serve in many different respects in different academic institutions. You're in public office. You're still connected to Cobra, the brand that you created and still have significant influence over. How do you make those calls, those decisions to spread yourself thin where many other people, and not to be ageist about this, just north of 60, go, you know what, I'm going to step back a little. You seem to be almost accelerating.
If I may just clarify one thing, I don't spread myself thin because I give my everything to everything that I do. My grandfather was a great tennis player. I remember I was very keen on tennis as a teenager, and he saw me playing a game once, and I lost against a player who I was much better than. And my grandfather called me after the game and said, "What were you doing there?" I said, "Well, I wasn't concentrating. I gave him a chance." He said, "Don't ever get back on that court unless you're going to give it your very best. In fact, in your life, don't ever do anything unless you're going to do your very best at what you're going to be doing." And I've never forgotten that advice. So whatever I do, I give it my everything. When I became president of the Confederation of British Industry, I didn't realize when I was appointed I was going to be president during the biggest crisis since the Second World War, during the pandemic and the Ukraine war starting. It took up 2/3 of my time. And I still carried on doing my work at the House of Lords. I still carried on being chairman of Cobra Beer. I still carried on being chancellor of the University of Birmingham. Nothing was in any way compromised. And the reason you can do that is A, you love all the things that you do, and B, that you have very good support. So I had a fantastic team supporting me, including my chief of staff of the CBI, my own chief of staff, my own team. And you have the support of your family. My wife is South African and wonderful, and she says, "Don't ever complain to me that you're doing too much. It's all your choice." and it is all entirely my choice. And that is the other important thing to remember. And the third thing is you've got to have the ability mentally to switch on to something. And when you're doing the next thing, you switch off it and you think doing something completely different, a different world, and you're moving into that different mindset. So you're able to switch on and off from different things many times in a day. And that ability to do that enables you to do all these things and therefore never spread yourself thin. But it's a good old saying, if you want something done, ask a busy person.
100%. Final question. How do you decide what not to do?
It is constantly about saying no. What people don't realize is, although I do lots of things, I also say no to more than 90% of things. And it's difficult to say no because there are many things you want to do, but you just have to make those choices and prioritize. One has to just learn and be ruthless in that.
Be ruthless in saying no. That's a good start. Deciding what not to do. But actually, Lord Karan Bilimoria's art of deciding is much more about doing, seeing the problem, finding the solution, taking action, and doing it now, not tomorrow. It's also about trust, placing it in the right people and earning it yourself. Don't give up. Do everything in the very best way you can, and most importantly, catch the waves of luck that come past you. Remember, he says, luck is when determination meets opportunity. For a man who talks a lot about luck, I think it's clear that he's not suggesting waiting around for things to happen. Predict where the game is going and make the decision that gets you there first. Thank you for listening to this episode of The Art of Deciding, the podcast where we ask people who make big decisions to reveal a little of how they do it. You'll find us on all the major podcast platforms, so please click follow so that you don't miss an episode. In the series already, we've asked the best-selling writer Lee Child about his decision to kill or not to kill Jack Reacher, entrepreneur and activist Sharmadean Reed about her manifesto for women in business, and Sir Brad Freed about the power of silence, even when you're chair of the Bank of England. Where Lee Child told us his biggest regret was occasionally being timid, that wasn't Brad Freed's problem when he cold called the man who would later on become the head of the World Bank.
Look at it differently, Bruce. Look at the counterfactual. What's the downside of picking up the phone to Jim Wolfenson in New York? The downside, he could say, "Do me a favor, young man. I'm a busy guy. Never phone me again. So long as you live, never phone me again. I cannot believe you disturbed my day. It's a big deal. What was I doing anyhow that day? Nothing. I was trying to kind of reconcile some cash book against the ledger. I was being shouted at by a manager. I was being told that I'm not allowed to go out at lunch without wearing my jacket. What were the choices? Either I could carry on, do more of that, or I could say I got to break out completely.
The decision-making process then is go big because you have nothing to lose.
100%, always. But always go big, but always be rational and never take a risk where if it goes the wrong way, you blow it all.
That's The Art of Deciding with Sir Brad Freed. And you can check out all of the arts of deciding so far. And please give us a rating and leave a review. Even better, share a link far and wide to help as many people as possible make better decisions. I'm Bruce Whitfield. You can find out more about me on brucewhitfield.com. Till next time, bye-bye.